Chicago area woman Dana Holmes was pulled over and arrested by law enforcement in LaSalle County in May of 2013 after her blood alcohol content was found to be 3 times over the legal limit. She was taken to a local jail where surveillance footage would show a group of deputies, 3 men and 1 woman, carrying Holmes into a cell and forcibly stripping her naked. A deputy later threw a stack of blankets and what the authorities described as a padded suit into the cell. The cops would deny any wrongdoing and claimed that Holmes was combative during the booking process. Footage leading up to her being stripped would show the woman, at the time in her early 30s, being searched against the wall and moving her leg. The deputies would claim that she kicked them, but she denied doing so. As dictated by Illinois law at the time, strip searches were only allowed if officers had reasonable belief that the inmate was concealing a weapon or controlled substance. It didn't, however, cover situations where they were uncooperative during the booking process, and the officer's responsibility was to place them in a cell without items that they could use to potentially self-harm. In the fall of 2013, Holmes sued LaSalle County authorities alleging that she'd suffered emotional harm and that her civil rights had been violated by the search, which she claimed had been conducted without any legal justification. In the spring of 2014, the county agreed to pay $355,000 in legal fees and settlement costs. The authorities also stated that they'd planned to implement new policies that would make forcible removal of an inmate's clothing allowed to occur only as a last resort. Further policy updates stated that the process would be video documented and accompanied by supervisory oversight and detailed reports. Number 8. Antonio Arnello Smith. In June of 2020, Georgia man Antonio Arnello Smith filed a lawsuit against the Valdosta Police Department, alleging that its officers had used excessive force in arresting him after he'd been mistaken for a panhandling suspect. As reported by the Valdosta Daily Times, the officers answered a report of panhandling outside a pharmacy on North Ashley Street, but were given no information regarding the physical appearance of the man involved. The incident began when a single officer approached 46-year-old Smith and questioned him as a possible suspect. The man claimed that he'd returned from a business up the road where he'd received a money wire from his sister, adding that his presence there could be verified by surveillance cameras. He complied when asked to present a form of identification. A sergeant and 2 more cops then arrived at the scene. The sergeant rushed Smith without announcing that he was under arrest. He bear-hugged the man and slammed him to the ground. The officer's body cam would record Smith screaming, "Oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? Jesus!" The other 2 cops assisted in the arrest and held Smith down. The sergeant tried to handcuff him and forced his wrist until it broke. Officers then seemingly realized that the man had been injured, so they told him to relax as they removed his restraints. They then rolled Smith over and alerted the emergency services. The sergeant then asked the officer who'd initially interacted with Smith if he was the panhandling suspect, but he replied negatively, saying that he'd just stopped to talk to him. Smith refused medical treatment, and recalling the incident, the sergeant would later state, "He was not angry with us, but he just wanted to go." Smith's attorney later filed a lawsuit against the officers involved in the arrest, as well as against the Valdosta police chief, mayor, and members of city council on grounds of conspiracy to create a false report, excessive force, false detention, false arrest, and assault and battery. In June of the following year, Valdosta city officials offered Smith a $350,000 legal settlement. Number 7. Amanda Howton. On July the 25th of 2016, Amanda Howton called the police in Layton City, Utah, after her car was struck from behind by another vehicle at a stop sign at Fort Lane and Antelope Drive. The collision was hard enough that Howton's airbags were deployed. She was still reeling from the crash when she was interviewed by 2 responding officers. Their interaction was captured on dash camera video. Howton was reportedly shocked that the officers were focusing their suspicions on her and not the driver who just hit her. The men were captured saying that she was acting weird and that her answers to their questions were sassy and full of energy. Even though Howton didn't smell of alcohol or exhibited other concrete signs of impairment, she was asked to perform a field sobriety test. When an officer pointed out that her balance was poor The woman indicated that it was due to the fact that she'd been in an accident, stating, "Because I'm in shock. I'm shaking." An officer was then seen reaching around Howton from behind and feeling between her breasts, grabbing her arm and pulling her back when she shied away. The officer hadn't announced the search and Howton accused him of groping her, but he maintained that he was allowed to pat her down. Howton was subsequently arrested for DUI and interference with an arresting officer. A toxicology evaluation would later reveal that she was completely clean of drugs and alcohol. Through her attorney, she offered a proposal for a $50,000 out-of-court settlement to the department in the fall of 2016, threatening to sue if it wasn't accepted. The proposal went unanswered, thus Howton followed through on her lawsuit. Its outcome remained unclear, but by December of 2016, the DUI charges against the woman had been dropped. Number 6. Brady Mystic. On September the 17th of 2019, Brady Mystic had just pulled up into the parking lot of a laundromat in Idaho Springs, Colorado, when he saw the flashing lights of a police vehicle behind him. Mystic had allegedly run a stop sign, but he was reportedly unaware of that aspect and didn't know that the police were there for him. He was a deaf man who couldn't read lips and was only able to form a few words verbally. He primarily relied on American Sign Language to communicate. He got out of his vehicle and began to walk towards the laundromat building. Mystic was then charged by officers Nicholas Hannin and Ellie Summers without warning or attempt to communicate, as a lawsuit would later allege. Hannin reportedly initiated a confrontation by shouting at Mystic, "Just who do you think you are?" before he started pulling on the man's shirt. Mystic, who couldn't hear the officer's commands, reportedly gestured to them in an attempt to express his confusion, but it was to no avail. Hannin and Summers took him down and were shown on body cam footage slamming his head into the concrete and using a taser on him. Following his violent arrest, Mystic was jailed for 4 months on charges of resisting arrest and second-degree assault on a police officer. The charges were eventually dismissed and he was released. Updates from the fall of 2021 indicated that Mystic had filed a lawsuit against Hannin and Summers, the City of Idaho Springs, and the Clear Creek County Board of Commissioners, seeking unspecified compensation for the pain and suffering he'd experienced during the arrest and due to his incarceration. Updates also indicated that Summers had remained on active duty while Hannin had been fired from the department in July of 2021 in connection with another violent arrest. Number 5. Tiffany McNeil. On July the 24th of 2017, the husband of Michigan woman Tiffany McNeil called the Coldwater Police Department to report that they'd been fighting while McNeil was intoxicated. The woman was taken into custody and video surveillance would show her being held against a wall in an area of the Branch County Jail by Officer Louis Eastmead. 5 other officers were present at the scene. The footage showed Eastmead suddenly grabbing a handcuffed McNeil by the hair, turning abruptly and slamming her head first into the concrete. The 31-year-old woman became unconscious and blood started pooling around her head. Eastmead was seen reportedly pushing his knee into her unconscious body in the immediate aftermath. McNeil was taken to hospital where she required 20 stitches for injuries to her face and where staff also determined she'd suffered a concussion. McNeil had no memory of the incident but described the aftermath by saying, "My hair was full of blood. My face was unrecognizable. It was completely swollen and black." The woman's injuries were also visible in her mugshot. She only realized what had happened to her after watching the surveillance clip, which was released and viewed millions of times across social media in the incident's wake. McNeil was charged with domestic violence and resisting arrest but only pleaded guilty to the former. Eastmead would justify his actions by saying that McNeil had become combative during the arrest. He claimed that she'd pushed herself off the wall and thrown her body at him, and that they ended up on the ground because he was unable to support her weight. McNeil subsequently filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of Coldwater, the Coldwater Police Department, Officer Eastmead, as well as the other officers present. She alleged that Eastmead had used excessive force against her and that the other officers had lied in their reports to support the false notion that she'd resisted arrest. Eastmead was fired from the department after the lawsuit was filed in the fall of 2019, the matter was settled for an undisclosed amount. Number 4. William Sidney Blevins. William Sidney Blevins and his girlfriend, Amanda Woods, were driving from Leesburg to Center in Alabama to meet a friend on January the 24th of 2023. The couple were pulled over by Officer Michael Andrew Kilgore, aged 39, who justified the decision by telling Blevins that his tag light was out. Kilgore asked to perform a search, but Blevins refused, at which point the officer demanded he and Woods step out of the car. He placed both of them in handcuffs. Kilgore then called Officer Shane Butler from the Cedar Bluff Police Department, who arrived at the scene with a K-9 unit. He approached the vehicle and ducked down by its passenger side, out of the couple's view. Butler then went to get the police dog, which subsequently jumped into the vehicle's passenger seat. Kilgore searched the car and produced a bag of methamphetamine, which he claimed to have found inside, but which Blevins would maintain he'd never seen before. The latter was arrested for drug possession and taken to the Cherokee County Jail, where he remained until the following afternoon. At the time, Kilgore had been employed by Center Police for less than a year, and the department began reporting a significant number of arrests, many of them drug-related, within months of him joining the force. A few days after Blevins' arrest, a confidential informant told the police that Kilgore was planting drugs on drivers, possibly as a way of boosting up his arrest record and facilitating his rise through the ranks. Following an investigation, Kilgore was arrested on May 3rd of 2023 for criminal conspiracy to commit a controlled substance crime distribution. Center Police Chief Kirk Blankenship told the media in a public statement, "There is no excuse for any officer violating the law like this." The charges against Blevins and other drivers were dismissed in the wake of Kilgore's arrest and the discovery of his schemes. Blevins filed a lawsuit against Kilgore, also naming Butler, on the basis of wrongful arrest and malicious prosecution. The suit mentioned that he'd suffered a shoulder injury after being forced to sleep on the jail's concrete floor, and that his name, mugshot, and charges had been published in the local paper. Number 3. Nicole Harper. On July the 9th of 2020, Nicole Harper was signaled to pull over by an Arkansas state trooper on US Highway 167 in Jacksonville after she was clocked at 84 miles per hour in a 60-mile-per-hour zone. Harper, who was pregnant at the time, reduced her speed, then activated her blinker and emergency lights as she was searching for a place where to pull over safely. She reportedly considered that there wasn't enough space on the nearest shoulder. After following Harper for about 2 minutes, Trooper Rodney Dunn initiated a pursuit intervention technique, or PIT. He struck Harper's car from behind, which sent it careening across lanes and into a concrete barrier before the vehicle flipped on its side. The vehicle's airbags were deployed and it started smoking. Harper was reported to have suffered serious body injuries, but her unborn baby wasn't hurt. As Dunn helped the woman out of the vehicle, he asked her why she hadn't pulled over when he signaled her. Harper told him that she thought it would have been safer to wait for the exit, to which Dunn replied, "No, ma'am, you should pull over when law enforcement stops you." The Arkansas driver's license manual instructed drivers to pull to the nearest, safest spot out of the traffic lane. Harper was arrested on charges of speeding and failing to yield to an emergency vehicle. She subsequently sued Dunn in Pulaski County Circuit Court, alleging he'd negligently used a pit maneuver against her. The matter was settled in the fall of 2021, with the agreement including a modest financial component, in addition to Arkansas State Police agreeing to policy changes and updated guidelines in its use of pit maneuvers. The update advised officers to only apply it when they believed it was objectively reasonable to protect a third person or an officer from imminent death or serious injury, or when the officer objectively believed other exigent circumstances existed. Number 2. Samuel Scott Jr. On June the 1st of 2018, a Florida man was taken into the custody of the Miami Police Department for what the media would later jokingly describe as him stealing his own car. Samuel Scott Jr., who was at the time in his early 40s, called 911 to report that his 2006 black Jeep Compass had been stolen from outside his aunt's house in Buena Vista. Roughly half an hour later, Scott was handcuffed by 5 police officers who'd mistaken him for the perpetrator, as he reportedly matched the description as a black male, bald, about 6 feet 2 inches, and heavy-set with a white tank top. When Scott insisted that they got the wrong person, an officer told him, "The description of the guy who took off in your car is just like yours," to which Scott replied, "But that's half of Miami." Surveillance footage from the scene would later show the man laughing by himself and saying, "I mean, why would I call the police?" He was arrested on charges of leaving the scene of an accident, false reporting of a crime, failure to carry a concealed weapon license, and possession of marijuana. All the charges were ultimately dropped. 3 years after the incident, Scott filed a lawsuit against the city of Miami and the 5 arresting officers, seeking $500,000 in damages. He alleged that he was unlawfully searched, wrongly imprisoned, and racially profiled. When fake self-defense claims go wrong is still coming up for you straight after number 1. Stay put if you haven't seen that one yet and would like to. Number 1. Carolyn O'Neill. Deputies in Fremont County, Colorado, were sent to a sober living facility in Canyon City in May of 2014 after being asked by management to perform a welfare check on Carolyn O'Neill. There were reportedly concerns that she was going to harm herself, as she'd been struggling with depression, in large part due to the fact that her mother was dying. 3 male officers went to O'Neill's apartment. The woman told them through the door that she wasn't going to hurt herself and that she was naked while preparing a bath. The police nevertheless obtained a key and entered her apartment. They threw O'Neill on the bed while she was still nude and took her into custody. At the local jail, she was placed in a restraint chair for several hours and was forced to wear a spit mask. Officers used a taser on the woman 2 times while she was restrained as she protested the arrest. A judge subsequently dismissed the resisting arrest and disorderly conduct charges that O'Neill faced. The woman filed a wrongful arrest lawsuit against the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, and in the winter of 2020, the suit was settled for $2.4 million. Number 7. Doris Spann Argo. The police in Charleston County, South Carolina, were dispatched to a home on the Isle of Palms on March the 21st of 2015 after receiving reports of a shooting on the property. Emergency responders arrived at the scene at approximately 4:15 p.m., at which point they reportedly came upon a victim, later identified as 53-year-old Jonathan Arden Argo, suffering from an apparent gunshot wound. He was transported to Medical University Hospital in Charleston, where he was ultimately pronounced dead. When approached for comment by local news outlets, neighbors revealed that the victim's wife, 44-year-old Doris Spann Argo, had been taken from the home in handcuffs shortly after the police's arrival. It was subsequently reported that the woman had been booked at the Al Cannon Detention Center on murder charges in connection to her husband's death. Following an official investigation into the matter, it was determined that during a heated argument at the couple's home, Argo had armed herself with a handgun, which she then used to fire the fatal round into her spouse of more than a decade. Sometime after the shooting, Argo allegedly cut herself with a knife in order to make it appear as though she'd been attacked by the victim first and had thus killed him in self-defense. Investigators quickly rejected this version of the events, however, and in June of 2016, Argo pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, resulting in a consequent prison term of at least 15 years. Number 6. Terry Dwayne Turner. Texas man Terry Dwayne Turner contacted the police in the early morning hours of October the 11th of 2021 and chillingly stated, "I just killed a guy." As was later detailed in subsequent reports, the 65-year-old Martindale resident had awoken in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, at which point he saw an unknown vehicle with its headlights off, parked next to his pickup truck in the driveway. Turner told the police that he subsequently retrieved his firearm from the bedroom and ran outside to confront the trespasser. When he emerged from his house, he reportedly watched as the driver of the vehicle activated its headlights and rapidly backed out of the driveway. Turner then gave chase, striking the car's front driver's side window with the butt of his handgun before firing a fatal round at the driver, later identified as 31-year-old Adil Dohi. In the wake of the incident, it emerged that Turner had told investigators that he'd fired his gun in self-defense after Doyle had brandished a weapon of his own. According to the resulting arrest report, however, the victim didn't have a gun in his possession, and Turner was consequently charged with felony murder in connection to the shooting. During the course of the ensuing police investigation, it was determined that on the night in question, Doyle had been driving back to his girlfriend's house in Maxwell after visiting his cousin in San Antonio. Detectives theorized that the man had gotten lost in Martindale and had pulled into Turner's driveway to look up directions. In February of 2022, a Caldwell County grand jury returned an indictment on a charge of first-degree murder for Turner, who reiterated his unfounded claims of self-defense. Number 5. Diane Christina Rodriguez Machado. On June 7th of 2021, police were called to a home in the Brazilian city of São Gonçalo, where they discovered the lifeless, naked and mutilated body of a male victim. It was later reported that the man had been murdered by his wife, Diane Christina Rodriguez Machado, in the early hours of the morning. After the victim was dead, Machado allegedly cut off his male reproductive organ and cooked it in soybean oil in a frying pan. The police seized a kitchen knife from the home, which they believed to have been used to both fatally stab and dismember the victim. Machado was arrested on charges of murder and corpse desecration, but maintained that she'd killed her husband in self-defense. She claimed that the man had gotten upset over the fact that their relationship was coming to an end and had subsequently threatened her with harm, prompting her to respond with lethal force. According to relatives of the couple, they'd been known to get into extremely heated arguments during the course of their romantic involvement, and Machado had even reported her husband to the police on one occasion. As of the latest updates on the case, Brazilian police's investigation was still ongoing. However, it was reported that the authorities had largely dismissed Machado's contention that she'd acted in self-defense during the fatal incident. Number 4. Michael Murray. On the night of August 3rd of 2014, Connor Morris, a member of the Headhunters Motorcycle Club, was killed during a street fight in the English village of West Auckland. According to subsequent reports, 33-year-old Michael Murray had witnessed Morris brutally beating his younger brother Stanley. The altercation was reportedly precipitated by a disagreement involving another member of Murray's friends group, who'd taken offense to the fact that Morris had refused to shake his hand. As Stanley was getting beaten to a pulp, Murray shouted, "Leave my brother alone," before grabbing a sickle that he'd used to cut his lawn earlier in the day. He approached Morris and directed a blow so the blade of the sickle entered the man's head with enough force to break the skull, as was later detailed by Crown prosecutors. 26-year-old Morris was killed instantly, and Murray was then taken into police custody on murder charges. During his interview with the police and his subsequent criminal trial, Murray vehemently maintained that his fatal strike on Morris had been performed in defense of his brother, whose life he believed to have been in jeopardy. Nevertheless, in September of 2015, Murray was convicted of the murder and consequently sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Murray later appealed his conviction, contending that media interest in Morris's death had led to an unfair trial. Justices Reese Harrison, Dennis Clifford, and Brendan Brown ultimately dismissed the appeal, ruling that there had been precautions put in place during the case's legal proceedings to avoid bias on the part of the jury. Number 3. Justin Dumphrey. During the late evening hours of January the 14th of 2018, Canadian man Justin Dumphrey fatally stabbed his girlfriend, Holly Hamilton, 17 times inside his Ontario apartment. Shortly thereafter, the woman was reported missing, and an extensive search effort was set into motion by local authorities. A few days later, her body was found in the trunk of her car at a parking garage in the city of Hamilton. The following day, Dumphrey was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in connection to Hamilton's death. In December of 2021, the 34-year-old man took the stand during the case's legal proceedings and testified that he'd acted in self-defense on the night in question. He claimed that his girlfriend had arrived at his apartment with a strange man who'd brandished a knife when asked to leave. Dumphrey described a chaotic struggle between him and the alleged assailant, which Hamilton had ultimately joined. The supposed altercation culminated with Hamilton being stabbed, according to the defendant's account. Dumphrey also stated that he'd then discarded her body and cleaned up the bloody scene because he was afraid that their daughter would awake to find the aftermath of the grisly brawl. Dumphrey's testimony, which didn't align with evidence found at the crime scene, was roundly rejected by the jury, which ultimately found him guilty of murder. In April of 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 years. North Carolina man Jason Corbett was found battered to death inside his home in Winston-Salem on August 2nd of 2015. The victim's wife, Molly Martins, claimed that she and her father, Thomas, a retired FBI agent, had killed him in an act of self-defense during what she described as a life-and-death struggle. According to Martin's account of the deadly incident, Corbett had been the one to initiate the altercation. Martins and her father proceeded to beat him with a paving brick and a baseball bat after he'd allegedly begun strangling her. Despite their self-defense claims, Martins and her father were eventually taken into police custody on suspicion of committing Corbett's murder. They pleaded not guilty and also reportedly filed a motion to have their ensuing criminal trial moved out of Davidson County, which was ultimately denied. Following a 5-week trial, they were both found guilty of second-degree murder and each consequently sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison. In 2020, however, the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned their convictions, citing supposed shortcomings on the part of Judge David Lee, who presided over the trial. Their release, which was met with outrage from the general public, was relatively short-lived, as it was reported in May of 2022 that Martins and her father would be tried again for Corbett's murder. Although as of recent updates, a date for the retrial hadn't been officially set, court officials indicated that it would likely be held in late fall of 2022. Number 1. Linda Doyle. At around 10 p.m. on July the 30th of 2019, Alabama woman Linda Doyle called 911 to report that she and her husband had gotten into a violent altercation at their Foley residence. When officers arrived at the scene a short time later, they found both Linda and her husband, James, sprawled across the floor with what appeared to be critical injuries. Paramedics ultimately pronounced James, who'd reportedly suffered a gunshot wound, dead at the scene, while Linda was airlifted to University Hospital in Foley. There, she received treatment for the myriad of stab wounds she'd sustained to the stomach and groin area. In her subsequent interviews with investigators, Linda maintained that she'd shot her husband in self-defense after he'd attacked her with a butcher knife while she slept. According to her testimony, the man's assault of her that night had been the most recent in a long line of spousal abuse incidents perpetrated over the course of many years. However, following a thorough police investigation, it was concluded that Linda's stab wounds had actually been self-inflicted. The woman had allegedly staged the crime scene to support her self-defense claims, when in reality, she'd gunned down her 71-year-old husband in cold blood. Linda had even at one point attempted to solicit the services of a hitman to kill James, but had eventually opted to perform the murderous deed herself. During her criminal trial at Baldwin County Court, Linda's self-defense story was rejected by the jury, who ultimately convicted her of murdering her husband. The 67-year-old woman was consequently sentenced to 99 years behind bars at Tutwiler Prison in Wetumpka. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be strip-searched every time you wanted to board a plane, or be randomly stopped by the police once per week for the rest of your life? Let us know in the comments section below.